I've never been the type of guy who asks for much. Give me some peace, a working fridge, and just enough cash to keep the lights on, and I'll call it a good life. But that summer, peace wasn't paying the rent, and cash was slipping out of my hands faster than I could hold it. So when I saw the ad in the back of the local paper, squeezed between a coupon for car washes and a dog breeder selling lab puppies, I didn't even hesitate. It was simple, almost suspiciously simple, and it read, Nightshift, grocery clerk, good pay, immediate start. No address, no logo, not even a company name, just a phone number in bold type. And I should have thought twice about how shady that looked, but when you're broke and desperate, your brain doesn't weigh pros and cons. It just grabs onto the first rope dangling over the cliff and holds tight. So I dialed the number right there in my kitchen, half expecting no one to pick up, but on the second ring, a man's voice answered, low and calm, like he had been waiting for me. And before I could introduce myself, before I could even say my name, he cut me off with 3 words. You're hired, midnight tomorrow. Then the line went dead. No interview, no questions, no paperwork, just an order. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the flat dial tone, thinking maybe I'd just agreed to a scam or worse, but desperation has a way of turning suspicion into opportunity, so I told myself it was fine. Maybe the place was short-staffed. Maybe they were desperate for workers, and I convinced myself it didn't matter how weird it seemed. Money was money, and I needed it. The next night, I followed the directions he had given, driving out of town long past where the streetlights stopped, and the roads got cracked and lonely until the pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt, and there, hunched at the end of a road lined with weeds and sagging mailboxes, stood the grocery store. It wasn't branded like the ones in town, no cheerful logos or bright neon colors, just a squat building with a low roof and a faded sign that said, groceries, in block red letters peeling like scabs. The parking lot was cracked, the stripes long gone, and only one street lamp buzzed overhead, casting a pale cone of light on an overturned shopping cart that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I parked and sat in the car for a full minute, staring at the building, half wishing I could back out. But then I remembered my bank balance, my landlord's texts, and the weight of all the things I owed pressing on me, and I forced myself out of the car. The air smelled faintly of rust and old rain, and the glass doors slid open too slowly when I approached, groaning like they'd forgotten how to work. Inside, the place smelled of bleach and dust, like someone had tried to clean years of neglect in one go, but only managed to stir it up. The shelves were half-stocked, products stacked unevenly, some with labels I didn't recognize, brands I'd never seen in any store, words and languages I couldn't place, expiration dates printed with strange symbols instead of numbers. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright in some aisles, too dim in others, and the air felt thick, like it was being recycled too slowly. Behind the register, taped to the counter with yellowing edges, was a single sheet of paper. My first instinct was to think it was a cleaning checklist, or maybe a training schedule. But as I got closer and read the bold words across the top, my chest tightened. It said, Rules for night shift. Follow them, or don't bother showing up again. I laughed a little under my breath, trying to shake off the unease, thinking maybe it was a prank for new employees. But then I read the first rule, and the laugh dried in my throat. Rule 1. Always greet the butcher. That was it. Plain. Direct. No explanation. I stared at the words, half smiling like it was dumb, until I heard it. A wet, rhythmic sound, like meat being hacked apart with something heavy. I turned toward the butcher counter, and there, under the sputtering fluorescent light, stood a man in a stained apron, his hands moving in jerks as he brought a cleaver down again and again on the bare surface of the counter. My breath caught when I realized there was nothing beneath his blade. No meat, no cutting board, just the steel cleaver striking the counter with dull, stomach-turning thuds. He stopped suddenly, the sound hanging in the air, and raised his head slowly, until his face tilted toward me. His skin looked stretched too tight, pale and waxy, like a mannequin left too long in the sun, and his eyes were deep, sunken hollows that still managed to glint in the light. His mouth curved into a grin that showed too many teeth, sharp and crowded, and he didn't say a word, just stared, waiting. My throat went dry, my hands clammy. I remembered the rule. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. Good evening? The butcher's grin widened, his head tilted, and then, without a word, he lowered his gaze back to the counter and resumed his chopping, the cleaver slamming down in a slow, steady rhythm that felt more like a heartbeat than work. I backed away toward the register, my pulse racing, my mind scrambling for excuses. Maybe it was a hazing ritual. Maybe they hired some creep to scare off rookies. Maybe I was just imagining half of what I saw. But as I reached the counter and looked again at that sheet of paper, the rest of the rules stared back at me, each one stranger than the last, and I realized the ad hadn't lied. I had been hired. Midnight to morning. Good pay. All I had to do was survive the night and follow the rules. I kept glancing toward the butcher's counter as I tried to settle behind the register, because even though I had greeted him and the rules said that was all I needed to do, there was something in the way he kept chopping at nothing that made my stomach tighten. Like maybe if I looked away for too long, I'd look back and find him closer, leaning over the counter with those sunken eyes fixed directly on me. So I tried to distract myself by scanning the rest of the store, running my hand across the laminated rule sheet like it could anchor me to something normal. And that's when my eyes landed on Rule 2. Never restock aisle 6. I frowned, half wondering if this was some kind of employee prank, like telling the new guy never to push the red button just to see if he does. But then I remembered the way the butcher's grin had spread when I said good evening. Too wide, too sharp, too knowing. And suddenly the idea of pranks didn't feel funny anymore. I took a slow breath, told myself not to overthink, and forced my legs to carry me on a quick lap around the aisles, just to show myself there was nothing out of place. Cereal boxes tilted like crooked teeth, soup cans dusty and dented, snack shelves with brands I had never seen before, names like Crunchy Salt and Happy Meal Mix, printed on bags that looked like they had been sitting under fluorescent lights for decades. Most aisles were half-stocked and harmless, but when I reached aisle 6, something in me froze. The overhead light flickered weakly, buzzing like a fly against a window pane, and the tiles beneath my shoes felt just a little colder than the rest of the floor. From the front, it looked normal. Shelves of canned vegetables, jars of off-brand peanut butter, packages of noodles. But as I looked further down, I noticed the shelves didn't quite line up with the others in the store. It was subtle, but they seemed to lean inward, almost bowing toward each other, like they were trying to close the aisle off or maybe funnel anyone who entered straight toward the shadow at the back. A chill rolled down my spine, and I remembered the rule again. Never restock aisle 6. I didn't even touch the shelves, just stood there staring as if waiting for them to move on their own. And then, as if to remind me this wasn't my imagination, a can slid off the top shelf and clattered onto the floor at my feet. I didn't pick it up, I didn't even bend. I just backed away slowly until I could no longer see the crooked end of the aisle. My heart was thudding in my chest, and I nearly laughed at myself, whispering under my breath, "It's just a can, it's just a shelf." But then faintly, from the butcher section, I heard the chopping stop. I glanced over. The counter was empty. My breath hitched. I swore I'd seen him there not 5 minutes ago, grinning and hacking at the surface. But now the entire butcher counter was vacant. No man, no cleaver, just a slab of scarred wood and the faint imprint of something that looked like dried rust or blood. My legs tensed to run, but before I could move, the sound came again, a wet, measured thud echoing down aisle 6. He was there. The butcher stood 3 shelves deep, cleaver resting flat on his palm like a priest holding a book. And when he lifted his head to look at me, he didn't grin this time. He just shook his head, slow, deliberate, and then blinked out like a candle flame snuffed by unseen fingers. My body went cold. I backed out of the aisle completely and nearly tripped over the base of a display rack. Every instinct screamed at me to grab my bag and get out. But then I looked back at the register, at that sheet of paper with its curling yellow edges, and something in me knew the rules weren't a joke. They were survival. I sat back behind the counter, trying to steady my breathing.
And that's when I noticed something else. Toward the front of the store, beside the automatic doors, sat a cheap plastic bin with a cracked label that read, "Lost and Found." Inside, half buried under old scarves and worn-out gloves, was a child's pink shoe, small and muddy, and my first thought was, poor kid, someone must have dropped it. But then Rule 3 came back to me like an electric shock. Don't touch anything left in the Lost and Found. My hand had already started to reach toward it before I caught myself and jerked back. I shoved both hands under the counter like they belonged locked up, and for a second I swore I felt the shoe shift slightly in the bin, like something underneath it had exhaled. I snapped my eyes away and stared at the counter until I was sure my pulse would stop hammering. And that's when the fluorescent lights overhead flickered, once, twice, then steadied, and I thought maybe the worst was over. But then, just as I let myself breathe again, I caught movement at the glass doors. A shape. A woman's shape. Pale. Thin. Dressed in white. And without thinking, I ducked low, heart in my throat, because I already knew what the next rule said.
The moment I saw her glide across the glass doors, pale and slow like fog pressed into human form, every hair on my body bristled, and I dropped into a crouch behind the produce section because I already knew Rule 4 by heart. If you see the woman in white, hide behind the produce section. It sounded ridiculous when I'd first read it, like something straight out of a ghost story, but there I was on the cold tile floor, wedged between stacked crates of apples and a tower of bagged potatoes, trying not to breathe too loud while the overhead misters hissed to life with a soft spray that turned the air wet and clammy, fog curling around me until it felt like the store itself wanted to smother me. Through the mist, I caught glimpses of her as she moved, long fingers trailing along the shelves, nails clicking against plastic tags as if she were reading the prices with her touch. Her dress was white, but not like wedding white. It was the sickly yellowed white of old paper left in the sun too long, thin fabric that floated an inch above the ground like it wasn't subject to gravity. I pressed myself tighter into the apples, heart hammering so hard I swore the fruit around me could feel it. My eyes stung from holding them too wide, afraid that if I blinked, she'd be right in front of me. A pear rolled off the top crate and tapped against my shoe, circling it slowly like an orbit, and I didn't dare move. The sound of her steps wasn't footsteps, it was the dry rustle of pages turning in a book. Shh, shh, as she drifted closer to the end of the produce aisle. I felt her presence tilt toward me, like the heat of a body leaning close, though the air grew colder until my breath fogged in front of me. The smell hit me next. Lilies mixed with freezer burn, sweet and rotten, funeral flowers stored too long in ice. I squeezed my eyes shut, whispering silently, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." The intercom sputtered then, coughing a single broken syllable, "Aisle," before dying into static. And that sound must have distracted her because the pressure against my neck eased and I heard the dry rustle of her dress gliding away. I dared to open my eyes a sliver and saw her reaching the front of the store, head tilting toward the lost and found bin. I wanted to scream when I realized the pink shoe I'd seen earlier was gone. In its place, sitting upright and gleaming faintly even in the dim light, was a bronze key attached to a faded keychain stamped with the words, Aisle 6. My stomach dropped. I gripped the edge of the potato crate until my knuckles whitened, every instinct in me screaming to stay hidden, because the rules had been clear. Don't restock aisle 6. I watched, paralyzed as she lingered near the automatic doors. The sensors tried to open them, stuttering back and forth, but she didn't step through them like a normal person. She simply thinned, her body stretching into mist, and slid between the glass panes as if she was never made of flesh at all. 1 second she was there, the next she was gone, leaving behind only a faint wet patch on the tiles that smelled faintly of mildew. The misters hissed off. The fog thinned.
I uncurled slowly from behind the apples, legs trembling so badly I nearly collapsed, and I pressed both palms flat against the cool tile floor to steady myself. My breathing was ragged, shallow, and I couldn't decide what terrified me more, that I had just seen something inhuman inside a rundown grocery store, or that the rules had been right, that the paper wasn't a joke, or a prank, or some twisted initiation, but a survival manual written by whoever had worked here before me. I forced myself to crawl forward until I reached the counter again, dragging my body like every step was through quicksand. The bin sat there innocently, the bronze key glinting up at me like bait on a hook. And I felt my hand twitch, almost rise of its own accord, as if something unseen wanted me to pick it up. But I remembered Rule 3. Don't touch anything in the lost and found. My hand jerked back like I'd nearly touched a flame, and I slid onto the stool behind the counter, burying my face in my palms. The rules weren't just suggestions, they were lifelines. And now somewhere inside this rotten, crooked little store, aisle 6 waited, with its crooked shelves and impossible depth. And in my gut, I knew the woman in white had left me that key on purpose. She wanted me to open it. She wanted me to step inside. And the thought of that made my skin crawl in ways I didn't have words for.
I told myself I'd stay put behind the register for the rest of the shift, keep my head down, keep my hands to myself, and just wait for morning. But the problem was, once you've seen something like her, thin and white, sliding through glass like mist, you can't unsee it, and your brain keeps poking at you like a splinter under the skin, whispering questions you don't want answers to. So even though I tried to focus on the hum of the freezer units and the steady tick of the clock, my eyes kept straying toward aisle 6, toward that crooked stretch of shelves that seemed to lean inward. And finally, I gave in and told myself I'd just look, just for a second, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. The second I stepped into the mouth of aisle 6, I knew it wasn't my imagination. The air changed immediately, colder, heavier, like walking into a basement that had been sealed off for decades. And even the floor looked wrong. The tile grout didn't line up with the rest of the store, slanting in toward the center as if the whole aisle were pulling itself into a funnel. The shelves bowed, the fluorescent light overhead buzzed, dimmer than anywhere else, and at the far end, beyond where the light reached, shadows pooled so thick it looked like the aisle kept going forever. I tried to laugh it off, just a weird design flaw, maybe the floor was uneven, maybe the bulbs were bad. But then I noticed the boxes stacked halfway down, cardboard cartons slit open, with their tape curled back like tongues. Each was stenciled with block letters, returned to sender. No company logos, no addresses, just that one phrase. My curiosity tugged harder, so I peeked inside one of the cartons, and my stomach tightened. Rows of glass jars filled with something gray, something granular that shifted faintly even though the air was still. The labels were smeared, printed in a language I didn't recognize, characters that looked more like scratches than letters. A date was stamped near the bottom, but it wasn't a normal expiration date. Just a string of numbers that didn't fit any calendar I knew, like 43-17-999. I put the jar back quickly, and as I did, I felt a faint draft brush against my cheek, cold and dry, the kind of air that doesn't belong inside a grocery store. My first thought was that there must be a vent somewhere back here, but as I looked closer, I realized the draft was coming from the dark end of the aisle, from that impossible shadow that looked deeper than the store itself. That's when I heard it, a low voice, rumbling like a fridge motor at first, but layered with words I couldn't quite catch. My name was in there, Tonny, whispered low, drawn out like a thread pulling taut. My chest went tight, and then just as suddenly, the chopping sound echoed from somewhere ahead, wet,
heavy thuds that made my teeth clench. I turned my head, and there he was, the butcher. He was standing 3 shelves deep into aisle 6, cleaver balanced flat across his palm as though offering it up in a ritual. And when his hollow eyes lifted to meet mine, he didn't smile. He didn't move. He just shook his head slowly, the motion deliberate like a warning. And then he vanished, snuffed out like smoke caught by a breeze. The jars rattled in the open box, and one of the cans on the shelf rolled free, hitting the tile with a metallic clang before spinning to face me. The barcode side glared up at me, like a single staring eye. My stomach churned. I didn't pick it up. I didn't move closer. Instead, I took one slow step backward, then another, until the air warmed, until the shelves looked straight again, until the buzzing light steadied above me. I stumbled out of aisle 6 like I'd just escaped a tunnel that had tried to swallow me whole. Back at the register, I gripped the counter edge with both hands until my knuckles burned white, forcing myself to breathe, forcing myself to remember the rule: never restock aisle 6. I didn't have to restock it. I didn't have to touch it. I just had to stay the hell away. Still, when I looked back at the bin by the door, the bronze key gleamed brighter than before, like it had been polished, like it wanted me to notice. The woman in white had left it for me, and aisle 6 wanted me to use it. My gut told me one thing for certain: I wasn't supposed to survive if I did.
By the time I stumbled back to the counter, my head was buzzing almost as loud as the fluorescents. My stomach knotted so tight it felt like I'd swallowed a stone, and I kept telling myself to just sit, just breathe, just wait out the shift. But the store didn't give me that mercy. It had its own timing, its own pulse, and at exactly 3:03 a.m., the register twitched to life and spat out a receipt. I snatched it without thinking, hoping maybe it was some glitch that would distract me, but when I unrolled the strip, my blood went cold. No items, no subtotal, no tax, just a timestamp that matched the exact second I looked at it, and below that, printed in bold, uneven font, "Thank you, Tony." My heart lurched into my throat. The register wasn't supposed to know my name. My fingers trembled as I held the slip, and that's when the phone rang. I hadn't even realized there was a landline behind the counter, an old corded block phone yellowed with age. But there it was, vibrating against the wall like it hadn't rung in years and had been waiting just for me. I let it ring twice, frozen, then a third time, and finally I picked it up. The line hissed faintly, and a man's voice slithered through, calm, too calm. "Don't close early," he said, like he was telling me a secret, a smile hidden behind his words. "No matter who tells you." My mouth worked before my brain did. "Manager?" I asked, voice shaking. "Call me Hale," he answered. There was a pause, a deep inhale like the phone shared lungs with the freezer hum. "Audit at 4. If a man comes asking to balance tills, he isn't with us. Don't sign anything you didn't print." My blood ran cold. "Got it," I whispered, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. The silence stretched, then Hale said one more thing, softer, stranger. "And Tonny, the lady you hid from, she doesn't like produce because it's alive. Remember that." Before I could ask anything, the line clicked dead. I stood there with the receiver pressed to my ear, heart hammering, staring across the store at the produce section, where the mist still lingered faintly, where pears and apples sat heavy in crates, and I wondered what he meant by alive. My eyes slid to the lost and found bin. The bronze key still waited, glinting like a lure. I shoved the thought down and tried to steady myself. At 3:27, as if on cue, headlights splashed faintly across the front doors, though no sound of an engine came with them. I stepped forward cautiously and saw a man outside, neat in a beige cardigan holding a clipboard. He looked ordinary enough, even polite. Hair neatly combed, smile professional, but my stomach twisted the way it had in aisle 6. He raised the clipboard like a peace offering, and even through the glass, I could see a line on the paper already filled with my name, written in handwriting that wasn't mine. He mouthed the word audit slowly, deliberately. I shook my head, gesturing at the open 24-hour sign behind me, trying to pretend I had authority in a place I clearly didn't. His smile widened politely, but there was no warmth behind it. He held up a badge clip to his shirt pocket that read regional in block letters, but the photo on it was nothing but a smear of ash. My throat locked tight. I glanced at the counter, at the phone, at the rule sheet curling under yellow tape. Hale's warning pulsed in my head. Don't sign anything you didn't print. I stepped back slowly, and that's when I noticed it. The man's reflection in the glass wasn't moving in time with him. His mouth formed words, but the reflection's mouth wagged, delayed, like a badly dubbed movie. My breath caught. The butcher's cleaver slammed down somewhere in the back with a single decisive thud, a sound that seemed to shake the glass itself. The man's smile faltered for the first time. He tipped his head like a marionette string had been tugged too hard, then folded at the waist in an eerily graceful bow. He didn't turn as he left. He just glided backward across the lot, his shoes never making a sound, until the darkness swallowed him whole. I stood frozen at the doors, staring into the empty parking lot, the buzzing lamp above the cart casting its lonely cone of light. When I finally stepped back, my hands shook so badly I could barely grip the counter. A faint hum returned to the fluorescence, steadier now, like the store itself was proud of me for following the rules. But the register sat silent, the receipt with my name still curled at its edge, and the phone, dead and silent, seemed to wait for me to slip, to break the deal, to forget what Hale had said.
I had just started to think maybe the store would give me a break, that maybe I'd coast until sunrise with nothing but the buzzing lights and Ripley's absence of company. Strange thought. I almost missed the cat. But then the front doors sighed open on their own, and the bell above them rang, though I could have sworn it hadn't worked all night. And when I looked up from the counter, my stomach dropped, because standing just inside the mat was a boy, no older than 8. Damp hair clinging to his forehead like he'd just come in from rain, even though the lot outside was dry. His small shoulders hunched, his eyes glassy in that way kids look after they've cried too long and run out of tears. He wore one pink shoe, just one. The other foot was covered only in a soaked sock that squelched against the tile when he shifted. His voice was thin but polite, the kind of politeness that makes you ache. "Can I check the bin?" he asked, lifting a trembling finger toward the lost and found. I froze so hard it felt like my spine might crack. Rule 3 thundered in my skull. Don't touch anything left in the lost and found. "Sorry, buddy," I stammered, my throat dry. "Store policy says customers can't handle it." His lips trembled, his chin quivering the way it does right before a kid bursts into tears. But no tears came. His face had already used them up. "It's mine," he whispered, voice cracking. "Dad left it here. He said to wait. He said to wait right here." His words were strange, too rehearsed, like he had memorized them. I swallowed hard. "Where's your dad?" I asked, trying to sound calm, like this was normal, like kids showed up alone at haunted grocery stores every night. The boy raised his hand and pointed, not at the door, not at the street, but down aisle 6. My stomach flipped. He said he had to go in. He said it would be quick. The way he spoke made me want to scream, because his tone wasn't hopeful, wasn't casual. It was final, like he knew it wasn't quick, like he'd been waiting forever. The air in the store shifted then, the misters and produce hissing to life, fog rolling low and damp across the floor, like the store itself was holding its breath. A pear toppled from its crate and rolled toward me again, circling my shoe as though mocking me. The boy didn't even look at it. He just stared at the bin. My chest tightened as I followed his gaze. The bronze key still sat inside, glinting, daring me. And for a heartbeat, I almost reached for it. Not because I wanted it, but because I thought maybe giving it to him would fix things. Maybe he would smile. Maybe the rules could bend just once for a kid who'd lost a shoe. My hand twitched forward, but before my fingers touched the air above the bin, a sound cracked across the store. The butcher, stepping from behind produce, apron slick and red, cleaver raised high. He slammed it down into his counter so hard the board split. The sound shot through me like a gunshot. The boy flinched and stumbled back, his eyes wide and wild, and I realized then he wasn't entirely real, or maybe not entirely human. His outline blurred at the edges, like static on an old TV. He clutched his arms to his chest and whispered,
Dad said not to wait past sunrise. His voice was sharp with something I couldn't name. Fear? Warning? Surrender? And then, without the doors sliding, without the sensors blinking, he slipped out of the glass like the woman in white had, passing through the seam as if he were nothing more than fog. By the time I stumbled to the front, he was gone. No footsteps in the lot, no silhouette under the buzzing lamp. The only evidence he'd been there at all was a single damp sock print near the mat. Toes splayed, heel smudged, the kind of mark kids leave when they've been running barefoot on wet ground. I grabbed a mop from behind the counter, desperate to erase it, but no matter how many times I ran the head across the tile, the print wouldn't fade. It sat there, stubborn, like it was branded into the floor. I finally shoved the mop aside and sagged against the counter, chest heaving, heart galloping. The bin still hummed faintly, the bronze key glimmering as if mocking me. Rule 3 had saved me again. Don't touch the lost and found. Don't give in, not even to a child. Especially not to a child.
By the time 4 o'clock rolled around, I was running on nerves instead of caffeine, my body tight as a bowstring, every sound in that cursed grocery store pulling me toward the edge of panic. And that's when the inventory started moving on its own. Subtle at first, almost enough for me to think my tired eyes were playing tricks on me, like a can of diced tomatoes sliding a few inches down the shelf until it aligned perfectly with the rest, or a bag of rice rotating so that the nutrition label faced outward as neatly as if a stock boy had straightened it. But then more began shifting, row by row, until whole sections rearranged themselves in silence, the shelves clicking faintly like bones adjusting in a spine. I stood frozen behind the register, trying to convince myself this was harmless, that maybe the store had always been weirdly alive, that maybe this was just its way of tidying itself. But then the price guns under the counter began to snap and click, firing on their own, soft ratcheting sounds like dozens of unseen hands were marking everything in sight. And my stomach turned when I realized the rhythm spelled something. A pattern, a language I couldn't understand, but which still tickled the edge of my brain like déjà vu. My name was in there. I could feel it. Tonny, threaded through the clicks and thuds, over and over, whispered in barcode. My gaze drifted unwillingly toward aisle 6, and I saw one of the return-to-sender boxes had slid forward to the aisle's mouth, lid open again, its contents waiting like a mouth expecting a spoon. Inside, the gray granular stuff had shifted into ridges, ripples shaped like beach sand after the tide pulls back, except the ridges weren't random. They formed symbols, curling characters that weren't human but that my tongue wanted to pronounce anyway, syllables that pressed against my teeth, begging to come out. I slapped hand over my mouth and forced myself to step back, but the air thickened, pressing down like an invisible weight, like the aisle itself wanted to drag me in. With shaking hands, I grabbed a roll of tape from the counter and marched to the box, heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out, and I slapped the lid closed and taped it shut with scripts that squealed as though I were hurting something alive. The ridges inside flattened instantly, smoothed like erased chalk. I kicked the box back toward the shadows, and though it resisted politely like someone gently pushing back against my foot, it finally slid into the darkness where it belonged. That's when the intercom above me crackled and hissed, coughing out a voice that stole my breath. It was mine. My voice. "Stalker to aisle 6, it said in my exact tone, my exact cadence, except slower, dragged out like a recording warped by heat. I lunged for the volume dial and cranked it down until only static buzzed, my chest heaving, but the voice seemed to vibrate in the walls. Across the store, lettuce leaves shivered as though caught in a sudden draft, the produce section misting to life again, and fog spilled low over the floor. I ducked instinctively behind the apple crates, my skin crawling with dread, because I already knew what was coming. And sure enough, she appeared, the woman in white. She drifted along the end of frozen foods, her paper-dry dress whispering as it skimmed the shelves. Her presence turned the fog colder. But this time, I saw more than her hands. Her fingers weren't fingers at all. They were strips of barcode, pale and black-banded, edges frayed like torn receipt paper, each flexing like it was alive. She raised one hand, slowly, palm facing me, barcodes shifting and flickering across her skin, and then she gestured toward aisle 6.
the movement calm, almost inviting, as though asking if I'd help her restock. My pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to close my eyes, but her stillness pinned me in place like a rabbit caught in headlights. My lips began to part, to say something I didn't mean, something she wanted, and that's when I forced myself to whisper the only thing I knew: the rules. I muttered them under my breath like a prayer. Always greet the butcher. Never restock aisle 6. Don't touch the lost and found. Hide from the woman in white. Never close before sunrise. I repeated them, over and over, until the fog thinned and her shape seemed to falter, as though disappointment had folded her into itself. She lingered a moment longer, barcode fingers twitching, then slipped away, dissolving into the mist. The intercom fizzed out into silence. I stayed crouched behind the apples long after she'd gone, shaking, whispering the rules like lifelines, knowing that one slip, one break, and I'd never leave this store alive.
It was 4:44 a.m. when the register printer came alive again, chirping as though someone had just rung up a sale, and my blood ran cold the second I tore the paper free, because it wasn't a receipt at all. It was a message. One line typed across the strip in stark black ink: balance tills, closed doors, see manager. My hands shook so badly the paper slipped from my grip and curled on the counter like it wanted to crawl away, because I already knew what the rules said. Already knew closing before sunrise was forbidden. And yet here was the store itself, giving me an instruction that broke the very sheet taped to the counter. The air grew heavy, warm in a way it hadn't been all night, the fluorescents humming brighter, the freezers buzzing louder, as though the store wanted to mimic morning, to convince me it was time to shut down. Then came the sound, metal scraping overhead, and when I looked up, my chest seized. There was a grate, a heavy roll-down security door that hadn't been there before, rattling into place above the glass entrance, lowering inch by inch with a phantom weight. My hand twitched toward the keys, my mind whispering that maybe it was fine, maybe the rules didn't matter if the store itself told me otherwise. My heart argued back. The rules were survival. The rules had saved me. But the temptation burned. I reached toward the deadbolt anyway, fingertips brushing the cold metal, and that's when I heard the voice. Keep the doors open. It was low, deliberate, and unmistakable. The butcher. He stood at the edge of produce, cleaver gleaming wet in the fluorescent light, his hollow eyes fixed on me, and though his mouth barely moved, the words vibrated through the entire building. I froze, fingers snapping back from the lock. Yes, sir, I whispered, my throat tight. That's when the reflection caught me. In the glass doors where the grate rattled downward, I saw myself. Only it wasn't moving with me. It lagged behind, delayed like a poorly synced video. And then it did something I hadn't. It reached for the deadbolt. My breath faltered as my reflection twisted its face toward me, its features warped, misaligned, as though someone had drawn me from memory and gotten the proportions wrong. Eyes a little too far apart, mouth too wide, nose just slightly crooked. It grinned, a broken grin that didn't belong on my face, and turned the deadbolt silently. Panic surged in my chest, and I stumbled back, slamming into the counter, my pulse hammering so loudly I thought I'd pass out. The reflection me mouthed words against the glass, words I couldn't hear but could somehow feel. It said, "Close it." The grate rattled louder overhead, descending halfway now, shadowing the entrance. I wanted to scream, but the intercom crackled to life, and Hale's voice came through, rough and urgent. "Don't! Sunrise isn't a clock, it's a corridor." The words made no sense, but they carried the same gravity as every rule. I clung to them, repeating them under my breath. The lost and found bin beside the door vibrated suddenly, jumping like something inside was trying to escape. The bronze key rattled against its plastic walls, hopping once, twice, before a faint glow spilled from the scarves and gloves inside. My ringtone chimed next, sharp and familiar, and my heart sank when I saw the light. My phone, the one that had lost all signal the moment I drove down that dirt road. It was glowing in the bin, screen bright with a call. Mom! I staggered toward it, hands trembling, every fiber of me wanting to snatch it up, to hear her voice, to hear something normal. But the rules screamed louder. Don't touch the lost and found bin. The phone kept ringing, insistent, each chime digging into my bones. My eyes stung with tears. I gripped the counter edge, forcing my feet to stay planted, muttering no, 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 over and over.
The phone rang itself out and clicked to voicemail, and then I heard it. The voice. My mother's voice. Or something using it. "Tonny, please close up. You're done." The words were flat, lifeless, like an actor reading lines without meaning them, but hearing her tone, even hollowed out, made my chest cave in. The line clicked dead. The phone's glow vanished. Only the bronze key remained. The grate rattled once more, then stopped, as if scolded. The butcher tilted his head, waiting, cleaver raised like punctuation. I backed away from the lock, from the bin, from everything, whispering to myself, "Don't close before sunrise. Don't close before sunrise." Slowly, like a sigh of disappointment, the phantom grate rolled upward and disappeared into nothing, leaving the doors bare again. The store lights dimmed back to their normal buzz. My reflection, wrong and broken, flickered once in the glass, then dissolved into the shadows. I sank onto the stool, drenched in sweat, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my head. The rules had been tested, twisted, dangled in front of me with every trick the store could conjure. But I hadn't broken. Not yet.
I thought I had made it through the worst of it. Thought the store had played its last trick for the night. But the hour between 5 and 6 turned out to be the longest, cruelest stretch of time I've ever lived through, because nothing about it followed the rules of clocks anymore. The register time clicked 5:58, then 5:59, and when it struck 6, instead of relief, the ceiling bulbs surged so bright I had to shield my eyes. The freezers shed their fog as though thawing, and the whole place warmed unnaturally, pretending to be touched by morning sunlight. But when I looked outside, the sky was still black, thick and heavy as tar, no hint of dawn bleeding at the horizon. My body wanted to believe the lights, wanted to lock the door and end the shift, but my gut twisted because I knew what Hale had said. Sunrise wasn't a clock, it was a corridor. The receipt printer jolted, turning out a ribbon of paper that unfurled across the counter, stretching all the way to the floor, the strip blank from top to bottom except for the last inch, where the words "Store Closed" were stamped in bold. My skin prickled cold. Outside, I should have seen the first truck pass on Road 7, some farmer hauling hay or a commuter heading into town, but the road was empty, motionless, as though the world beyond the parking lot had been erased. Then I saw her again, the woman in white. She waited at the far end of frozen foods, thin and pale, her face still a blur I couldn't force myself to focus on. She raised her barcode fingers slowly, palm facing me, beckoning toward the entrance with a gesture almost gentle, almost kind, the way a nurse might coax a patient into warm water. My chest clenched as the misters hissed to life once more, spilling fog low across the floor, damp and curling around my legs as though trying to herd me. I ducked behind the apple crates, repeating the rules under my breath like scripture, but this time she didn't retreat. She lingered, hands still raised, head cocked as though waiting for me to break. Then a voice whispered behind me, not hers, not Hale's, but the deep guttural rumble from aisle 6, the one I'd sworn I'd heard forming my name before. It didn't command, it promised. Aisle 6. The shelves at the back of that cursed row creaked, shivering against each other, and I could swear the aisle was longer now, stretched like taffy, labels blinking in languages I couldn't read, then flickering back to English like they were mocking me. My stomach churned, as if the floor itself wanted to swallow me into it. I forced my gaze away, toward the front of the store, and froze. The reflection in the glass doors showed a sunrise. Gold light. Bright skies. Ordinary morning traffic. But when I blinked and looked outside directly, the lot was still cloaked in night. The single buzzing street lamp burning like an ember in the void. My reflection self stood tall, face fixed in that wrong, uncanny grin, one hand already turning the deadbolt. My pulse hammered so hard I thought my chest might split. Behind me, the butcher stepped into view, cleaver resting like a conductor's baton, eyes as hollow as pits. He gave me a slow nod, a signal to wait, to resist, to hold my ground. My knees shook, sweat dripping down my temples, but I obeyed, forcing myself to back away from the lock, to ignore the false dawn in the glass, to focus only on the rules that had kept me alive this long. The woman in white's figure trembled, thinning like smoke caught in a draft,
her barcoded fingers twitching as if unraveling. The intercom spat a single sound, one long exhale, before going silent. 6:07 blinked on the register. And then, finally, outside, the horizon bled a faint color. Not gold, like the reflection promised, but a stubborn, slate-gray line cutting through the black. Honest light. Real light. My breath hitched. The fog at my feet thinned, slipping away reluctantly, and the woman dissolved with it, folding into nothingness like a page set on fire from the edges inward. My reflection warped and rippled before melting into the glass until only I, pale and trembling, remained. I sagged back against the counter, chest heaving, realizing dawn had come at last, but not because of a clock, not because of numbers, but because the world itself decided it was time, and only then could the store finally let me go.
When the sun finally broke through the tree line, for real, not the fake golden glow the glass had tried to sell me, but the stubborn, pale gray morning light that spread like cold milk across the lot, the whole store exhaled, every wall and shelf releasing a long-held breath at once, and I felt it ripple through the air like the sigh of a prisoner at the sound of keys, the fluorescents flickering once before settling into their normal, steady buzz, the receipt ribbon on the floor curling at its edges and browning like paper tossed in a flame until it disintegrated into nothing, the intercom popping twice like a throat clearing before going silent at last. The register blinked 12 o'clock like it was embarrassed, then corrected itself, settling into the proper time as if the night had never happened. Behind the butcher's counter, I saw him, still as a statue, cleaver laid flat on the counter, his sunken eyes meeting mine without malice, only a tired acknowledgement. For the first time since I started working here, I thought he almost looked human, like whatever curse bound him loosened with the sunrise. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, and I nodded back. The smallest salute two soldiers might exchange at the end of a battle neither wanted to fight. I turned toward the lost and found bin, dreading and needing to look inside one last time. The bronze key was gone. In its place sat two pink shoes, neatly paired, clean and dry like they had never been worn through mud, and tucked inside one was a crumpled receipt, faded almost blank but with one word still legible at the bottom. Paid. My throat tightened. I didn't touch the shoes. I didn't dare. Rule 3 hadn't changed, and I wasn't about to test what Sunrise did or didn't forgive. Instead, I poured myself a cup of the scorched coffee sitting on the burner behind the counter. The taste like ash and old socks, but it grounded me, reminded me that my body was still here, still working, still mine. Outside, the parking lot looked ordinary again. Cracked asphalt, an overturned shopping cart, oil stains baked into the ground. Birds chirped faintly in the distance. A truck rattled down Road 7, loud and unremarkable, and the normalcy of the sound nearly made me cry. My shift should have ended then. By all rights, I should have grabbed my backpack and bolted into daylight without looking back. But something in me lingered, staring at the rule sheet still taped to the counter, its corners curled yellow and soft. Overnight, a new line had appeared at the bottom, faint and ghostly, written in gray type so light I almost missed it. It said, Rule 5 is not negotiable. Rule 5 had always been, never close before sunrise. It was already there, bold and black. Now it was repeated in faint ink, like someone wanted to make sure I understood. Or maybe it was a reminder left by whoever came before me, scratched into the paper by desperate hands, the last note of a worker who hadn't lasted. Either way, it sent a shiver through me, because it meant the rules weren't static. They grew, they shifted, they adapted to what the store needed. I stared at the list until my eyes blurred, then grabbed a pen from the counter and added a line of my own, small and quiet beneath the rest. Greet the butcher first, then the sun when it comes. I don't know why I wrote it, except it felt right, like passing on a truth someone else might need. At 7:10, the phone rang again. I picked it up without thinking, and Hale's voice slid through, smoother this time, almost pleased. You did fine. If you want the shift tomorrow, it's yours. His words should have horrified me, should have made me laugh bitterly and hang up, but instead I heard myself answer, steady and certain. I'll be here. He chuckled softly, the line clicked, and I set the phone down with hands that no longer trembled. I walked to the front doors and looked out one more time. The lot was quiet, the world was waking up. And yet I knew that when the clock hit midnight again, the butcher would be waiting at his counter, the woman in white would drift through produce, the boy might return for his shoes, and aisle 6 would stretch too long, filled with whispers not meant for human mouths. But now I understood the deal. The rules weren't just survival, they were a contract, and as long as I kept them, the store and I had an understanding.
I should have left. I should have driven until the dirt road was a memory. Instead, I unlocked the register drawer, slid the new receipt inside, and smiled faintly when Ripley, my one-eyed coworker who hadn't shown up all night, jumped onto the counter at last, curling up beside the sardine tins as if he had been there the whole time. He purred once, eye half shut, tail flicking. The sound was the only thing that felt absolutely real.
And that's the deal. The rules are strange, maybe even insane, but they're the only thing keeping me alive in that grocery store. I feed the butcher his greeting, I steer clear of aisle 6, I never touch the yak bin, I hide when she drifts through produce, and above all else, I don't close those doors until the real sun touches the lock. Some nights the rules feel less like survival and more like chains. But either way, they work. And the truth is, I've stopped asking why. Because in a place like this, you don't want answers. You want routine. You want rules. You want to live long enough to clock out when morning comes. So, if you ever find yourself driving down a dirt road at midnight and stumble across a grocery store with no name, don't go inside. And if you do, for God's sake, remember the rules.